more than ever, and to Farm Management Canada for setting all this up. I am thrilled to be sharing some of what I've learned and what I continue to learn, because this is such a process in not only communicating with each other, but communicating outside of agriculture, which is where we're going. So I will say, I am, if you've ever met me, a rather outgoing person. I absolutely thrive off the energy of the people around me. And so this is going to be a bit tough to present without having any feedback of your faces and those sorts of things. So I do encourage you, I know Heather encouraged you before, but I do encourage you please to ask questions as they come up. By no means does this presentation need to run as presentation and then questions. I think it'll probably work a lot better if we have some communication as we go. So Heather tells me that as things come up, if there's things I absolutely must answer, she'll let me know. So here we go. I will also say that I'm set up in the middle of my living room because it had the best light, and so I don't have the most amazing desk space right now. So, but that's okay. All right. Here we go. All right, we can skip over that part because we know that part. There we go. So, who am I? If you don't already know me, I am Lyndsey Smith. I'm the editor of realagriculture.com. I grew up in southeastern Manitoba on a small goat dairy, of all things. So you can judge me if you want, but those kids are cute, let me tell you. Anyway, I always knew I wanted to do something in agriculture and something in farming. I absolutely loved growing up on a farm. Was always fascinated by the livestock side, hardly even scratched the surface of the crop production side, and so it was easy for me to choose to take agriculture once I went into university, and I chose to do a diploma because I am practical to a fault, and I wanted to learn everything there was about the farm level. So that's the way I went. I've worked in layer barns. I worked actually on native grasses and alfalfa during my university years. But it was when I was just after I graduated, I was looking for work and somehow fell into publishing. And so it's a bit bizarre. It's never something I ever planned. I started writing, started doing some articles for Issues Inc. at the time, and it was this amazing glimpse into a part of the industry I'd never even thought about. I never really thought about, that it's someone's job to cover what's new and what's exciting and spread news and all these sorts of things. So I did end up taking several journalism courses after the fact, but that's not really where I started. My background is agriculture, not necessarily journalism. So I'm now into, I hate to say it, my second decade of working in ag media. I started writing and I've just sort of continued onwards from there. So it's been an amazing experience. I have gone from, learning the very basics with a lot of red ink and actually proofing things on paper and learning all the different shorthand and learning all the editing shorthand and those sorts of things, to now we've moved to most of or all of what I do is online. Everything is video and audio. And I gotta tell you, I never thought I'd be doing video. I really didn't, but I am. And it's been an amazing evolution in how I do my job and how farmers access information, what I can share with the agriculture industry. So that's sort of where we're at. And so in going from print and very traditional medium to online has of course brought with it all sorts of kind of learning experiences. So we're going to go into, now I will say I thank Cami Ryan and Andrew Campbell and Megan Madden for really lining this up, and of course the organizers have done a great job of getting you some significant sort of background and building blocks to where we're headed now, so I can bring in sort of the media piece and build off of the reasons we do what we do, how we learn visually, how to have those tough conversations, and also how to share them on online media. So we'll head to our next slide. The last one went for me, so I'm not sure if somebody else is doing that for me or not, but I can. Here we go. All right, so this is a bit of a, if everybody can see that okay, this is a bit of an overview of what we're going to do. So I have sort of been part of this evolution of ag media, and so I'm going to share how that has changed, what that means. We'll move into a bit of a discussion of, not just how social media is used in agriculture and what it means, but for those of us who are involved in our grower groups or just as farmers and want to move maybe beyond just talking to ourselves and want to get onto TV or into print or all those sorts of things, what that means. And really, I've left quite a bit of time for discussion at the end, because of course a big part of this is how we reach out past our own industry to really bridge, consumers absolutely are looking for, or they tell us they're looking for a lot more information on how their food is raised. What are some of the ways that already exist for doing that, and how we might improve on them or expand on where we are. So I really want a lot of involvement on that one, because of course I don't have all the answers. This is something I think as an industry we're putting together, which I think is great. So we'll move on to, that's sort of our overview. For some reason the scrolly bar doesn't want to work for me today. So we'll just do this. There. Okay. So what has been, yes, thanks. I'll use the up and down buttons because the scrolly bar is not working. Anyway, I like to look at it, and this is maybe a generational thing, and so let's not overgeneralize, but let's face it, millennials are totally full of themselves, and I've taken a quiz, and although I'm not born in those years, I'm pretty millennial. So media used to be, you waited for the morning paper, or you waited for the 6 p.m. newscast, you waited for the nightly news. We all were sort of captive to whatever media was going to send our way. It was on their timeline and in their format, and you waited. You just, you'd have to sit at home to watch the news, or, get the paper delivered to your house or go find it, all those sorts of things. We've really moved beyond that. Now, not to say that there isn't a place for print, because there is, and not to say that there isn't use for nightly newscasts or cable or any of those sorts of things, because there certainly is, although some people like to call the nightly news things I read on Twitter 6 hours ago. Anyway, we've really moved past that with things like Twitter, RSS feeds, Facebook. We really don't have to remain captive to what's coming at us. I don't know if anybody's heard of what cord cutters, but even HBO is coming out with a la carte service. So we've moved into this generation, and that's for all of us, regardless of our age, where we control what we want to read or what we're interested in. Now, we're all broadcasters. We can, in the palm of our hand with our smartphone, we can make high quality videos, we can share them, we can start a blog and have followers and people listen to us. And this is a wonderful thing, but that's never really existed before. To have that sort of platform has never been so easy. So what that means, of course, is that information, good news stories, getting the word out about events, all these sorts of things is so simple and so easy, and it's never been this easy before. The flip side, of course, is that it's also never been so easy to spread misinformation, which is really where the rubber hits the road here. Now, okay, something's going silly at the bottom, but okay. So, and this is one of the things that absolutely, if you've got any questions or want to mention anything, of course, I work in ag media, so I'm probably a little biased, and that's okay. But what I have found with social media and the rise of Web 2.0, if that's what you want to call it, having a social platform, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all these things, geography doesn't matter anymore. This is and it has always really been. I mean, I think it's what, the 1920s, since there were more people in rural areas than there were cities. It's been a very long time. So the rural constituents are the minority and have been for a really long time. And let's face it, unless you could find the time or the roads were good enough to get to the farm shows or get to the conferences, you can't always easily reach each other, talk to each other, compare, discuss problems, all those sorts of things. Social media shrinks all that geography down and has made it just an absolutely amazing tool for whether it's transparency, so markets information, especially grain markets, the fertilizer markets, whether it's sharing tips on, grazing or agronomy or all these sorts of things. Social media isn't just media in the sense of news. It's an actual sharing and discussion and networking platform. And I love that. It's just thrilling. And for me, in my job, as I worked in print, I'd be working 8 weeks, probably, maybe more than that, 8 weeks ahead of a deadline. And I'd have to be guessing what would be interesting or what would be timely. And of course, you've got themes and you've got all these sorts of things, but you're always behind and you always have to sort of guess. And then, a magazine goes out and people would read it, but the feedback mechanism wasn't necessarily there. Whereas now, and I use the example, I know Sarah Schultz is on this webinar. Hi, Sarah. And her husband, Jay, was talking about why wheat loses test weight. So mature wheat, whether it's standing or in the swath, if it gets rained on, it loses test weight, about a pound per bushel for every rain event. And there was some discussion why that happens, who knows. And I read this and I thought, that's a really good question. I have no idea why. And so if you'll see on that's Wheat Pete, Peter Johnson, he's a cereal specialist for Omafra, incredibly passionate about cereals and wheat especially. And I called him up and I said, Pete, this is what farmers want to know. Why does it happen? And within 2 days, I got the interview done, had it posted, could share it back with the people who wanted to know, the farmers who need to know, who want to know this information. And it's amazing. It's amazing that we can have that two-way conversation so immediately when it matters. Also, with YouTube especially, and I know any farmers in the audience, I'm sure you spend a lot of time on there looking at equipment. One of our so Real Agriculture does a lot of video and everything goes onto YouTube as well as our own player. And one of our most popular videos for a long time was on a manure spreader. And which, you sort of scratch your head, like what? Why would you? But turns out there's not a lot of manure spreader videos, or at least at that point there wasn't. But if you're looking at how something works or, how something's put together or how to tie a tie, where do we go? We go to YouTube. And what's been fantastic is that farmers are using this. Farmers are using it for fixing things, for researching new equipment, all those sorts of things. So I think this has been a fantastic evolution of communication and media for agriculture. There's a flip side to all of that. So as I said, with the ease of sharing and the speed of sharing, there comes a flip side. And well, social media has shrunk geography and has meant that farmers that might not have been connected to conversations that were happening before now are. It also means that exists for everybody else too. Now, is it wrong or bad that we all have equal access to some sort of communication or sharing tool? No, but it certainly means that, we have a term now that things go viral. That's a really new term. It didn't mean that even 5 years ago. It didn't mean what it means now. And so now we've got things like our shockumentaries and, I don't know about you guys, but I'm on Facebook and it's amazing to me how many stories I'll see posted that when you look at where they come from, they're not even a legitimate news site. They're not even trying to be legitimate. And yet we read a headline and perhaps very sensational, or perhaps it sort of resonates with us for whatever reason. Maybe we're struggling with a particular part of our diet or mood or something, and this story comes out that's the answer to everything, and it's really easy to click share or like or retweet, and we have this incredible rate of sharing of information. And the flip side of this, and this is what of course we're going to get into, is that realistically the bulk of us live in cities, and the bulk of our media live in cities and cover what matters to the city. Where agriculture is in an interesting place is that while it may all happen out on the landscape, although certainly we have a move to urban farming and urban agriculture, everybody eats. And so food, whether you're connected to the growing of food or not, you're connected to food. And so regardless of whether stuff that happens in the city really has anything to do with rural Canada, it does have to do with each and every one of us because it's food. So how do we deal with this is the big thing. So, all right, I'm going to, hang on, I just have to grab my second set of notes just to make sure. There's several slides in here that I've got a couple points I really want to make sure that we're going to do. Okay, so now, okay, when we're talking about, so there's kind of two sides to this. We're talking about connecting with media. That doesn't necessarily only mean urban media either. So I am part of ag media, and there are several other print publications that have web presence and a web, even radio really has a web presence now. So all media is using social media, but largely when we're talking about reaching out past ag media, we are talking about a largely urban population. But what's interesting is what some of the challenges are for dealing with media outside of the ag realm is that, quite honestly, many of our journalists come from a non-ag background, even if they're working in agriculture. So that does create its own challenge. It also creates its own opportunities. So this is sort of what we're going to go through, and then we're going to go through sort of how you pitch stories and why it matters and those sorts of things. So what builds off of that? Now, a friend of mine helped me build this slide deck, and she used my Twitter account to draw photos from, and I realized I take a lot of selfies. Anyway, but no duck face, so I'm giving myself a gold star for that one. All right, so what I want to talk about a little bit is whether we're talking about ag media or whether we're talking about general media or urban media, whatever you want to call it, it's media. It's all about relationships, all of it. It's all about who you know, whether they know you, what sort of rapport you may have, and how to build that rapport. So when I think a lot of people in agriculture get sort of tripped up by, a story comes out or something's important or they view it as important, and they want to pitch it, or they'd rather that their local paper or CTV or whoever it is be covering what they deem as important, but we sort of get tripped up by how do you communicate that that's really important. It sounds sort of silly, but really, if it's something you're interested in or it's something that you value, as from a journalist background or having to do this job, reaching out first actually goes a long way. In that just about every media personality is probably on Twitter, or they, at the end of their articles in the paper, are going to leave their email address or their phone number, and honestly, use them. I mean, it sounds really silly, but use them before you have to, is I guess really the key point, is that the more you talk to someone who's either done a story or you're pitching them a story, the more you have that back and forth and that rapport, so that they know you're a grain farmer, but you also have cattle, or they know that you have an agritourism business as well, or that you farm in a certain area that tends to have certain pest problems, or those sorts of things. The more you can communicate that, and they can cultivate their sources, which is really what you become. You become a great source. The more you can do that, the more likely they are to call you. Now, we are going to get into sort of the tips on how you might interact with print versus radio versus video. But one of the things that if you are or want to reach out or those sorts of things, or let's say you have built a relationship and then they do call you and they want an interview or they want a statement or those sorts of things, it's also okay to say, I might not be the right person, and pass them on to someone else who might be the right person. It's okay to encourage them to reach out to different experts that you might know of, or within different grower groups or those sorts of things. So, but the key part of making that work is actually knowing who those people are. So one of the key things is that if you're part of a grower group or this is something you really want to do and you're volunteering with certain organizations and outreach is really one of the things you want to do, it's okay to have what you're comfortable with. So it's okay to have certain topics, events, upcoming things that you want to talk about. But it's really important that you also make sure you do a bit of homework and keep a really decent list of some other experts that you might want to pass people on to. So, right. Now, one of the things, I'm just going to check what the next slide is because I think I know. Okay, yeah, before we go there, I do want to, hang on, just one sec. There we go. So one of the things that sort of builds off of this as well is taking, as I said before, taking into consideration that even your ag media may not have an ag background. And this is one of those parts where, and I think it's wonderful, and I know several people in the industry who have now been in it for, 10, 15 years, who maybe don't even have a rural background, let alone a farming background, and they took journalism and they didn't take any agriculture, and they have learned from doing a ton of research, asking a lot of questions, all these sorts of things, and they've built a lot of ag knowledge. What's really great, actually, about recognizing that the person you're speaking to, who may be doing a rather in-depth story or may be doing a really interesting story, recognizing that they might want a lot of background info, whether they're urban media or non-urban media. If they're ag media, they may even want a lot of background info. And so you can be a resource. You can be a phenomenal resource if you reach out and offer a lot of background information. Let's face it, not all of us are willing to ask the question that's maybe really obvious. And one thing that I continually learn as I go through this career of mine is that the more I learn, the more I have to learn. And so I can only imagine for someone who's just starting to cover the agriculture beat to have to learn the differences between a combine and a seeder or a planter or a dairy cow from a beef cow and all these very basic things that those of us who grew up on a farm sort of roll our eyes at and think, oh, how could they not know that? We have to understand where people are coming from. So even our ag media may not be coming from an ag background, but it's a really great opportunity, I think, if you're going to act as a resource to fill them in, share that knowledge that you have, share the background that you have, and let what you love about what you do and your industry absolutely shine through. It's also an opportunity to shape the breadth of their knowledge and maybe some of the things they haven't thought about. So this plays in a lot and let's face it, we all have biases. So we have things we're very passionate about. We have industries we're a part of, and not everybody is going to agree with how you do things or those sorts of things. But everybody has their chance, if they're being interviewed or cultivating that relationship, to reach out, be that resource, fill in their background, your own background, what you're passionate about, all those sorts of things. So use that time if you're reaching out or if you're being interviewed to feel free to offer, some people might say this or this is how I feel about that, and really start to stretch and expand the breadth of a problem that maybe they're calling about. Because what we'll get into in the next part is that, of course, there has to be a hook. There has to be a reason to pick a headline and sell a story. Media is not media is a bit of a tough business. I'll be honest, with the move to online, and this idea that if you have a web connection, everything's free, and all those sorts of things. Nothing's free. Advertising has to happen. All those sorts of things. Whether it's selling papers or garnering views on videos or having people attend the nightly newscast, whether you're ag media or mainstream media, you need a hook. And that might come off if people are calling you as an angle or a bias that you're not comfortable with. And it's okay to call them on that. It's okay to... What some interviewees or journalists might do is, if they've got a hook or they've got a line, they might start a line of questioning with, are you saying that? And fill in the blank. And the reason they're doing that is because, of course, they need quotes, and they need pull quotes, and they need hooks and all those sorts of things. And it's not a bad thing, because journalists are very good at what they do, and they can be very creative people, and they can create a narrative that's really engaging. But when they ask a leading question like that, and it's not what you would say, it's okay to say no. It's okay to say, no, I wouldn't say that. I would say this. And that can sometimes be that clue to maybe the angle they're trying to take on a story to keep it fresh or timely or important. And so it's okay to stand back and say, that's not really what I am saying. Let's come back to the message that, how I feel about this, or what I feel is at stake here, or what I feel the issue is. And that is something that some people really have a tough time with. When an interviewer has a microphone in your face and says, are you saying that? Or would you say that this, blah, blah, blah. It's okay to say absolutely not, because then they can't say that you said that and quote you on it. So we'll continue that on. Can't believe no one has questions. I mean, really? Okay. All right. So, okay, so Sarah, should I wait? I'll wait. Or I can't read the rest of your comment. I can't read it all, Sarah. Hang on, there is a question, so we're going to wait. Okay, on advocating. Yeah, but was unhappy with, hang on. I can't read the rest of it. Oh, here we go. Oh, with the headline. Okay, hang on. So, hang on, I can't read it. I'll just type here. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to read your question, but for some reason, it's not. It will show me the beginning, and then it shows me your next comment, but it's not showing the whole thing. I think, though, what's probably from what I saw is that you're happy with sort of the interview, or that it was accurate, but the headline wasn't. I will say, or that you weren't happy with the headline, or maybe the headline was slightly sensational, or those sorts of things. It is one of those unfortunate things, and sometimes the headline crosses a line. I will say, and anyone who's done any sort of writing or any of these things, that headline writing, I've actually taken an entire course in writing headlines. Yeah. Okay, so here we go. But was unhappy with how the headline was sensationalized. Yeah, it's my... Okay. So, unfortunately, headline writing is very difficult. You are trying to summarize an entire article in probably less than 7 words. Maybe even less than that. Maybe you have a subhead that can further explain, but maybe you can't. This is where follow-up, I think, really comes in. Unless a headline is completely unfactual, so if it's actually... Sometimes they are a bit of a stretch. I'll be honest. In this day and age of clickbait on Facebook and Twitter and these sorts of things, you get paid through traffic, through making something probably slightly more sensational or overpromising maybe than what the actual article is. Okay, so she's saying if I click on this, I should be able to see the whole thing. But anyway, I saw it, so it's okay. So is there a way to avoid that? Not really. No, I do get into, in just a couple slides, I do get into fact checking and asking to see something before it goes to print. The long and the short of it is it's a courtesy, and so we'll get into that in a minute. I would think that the best you can do if a headline has been sensationalized but isn't necessarily untrue, this is where a follow-up might be useful, recognizing that the person who wrote the article may not have written the headline. So depending on if you're in a newspaper and it's a reporter you're talking to, I can almost guarantee that reporter's written headline as he or she submitted it is not what made it to print. So sometimes you've also got the social media side. So if they've got somebody who handles their posting to the web, they may rewrite it because, of course, we're also trying to optimize SEO, so search engine optimization. So it's not nice, and I absolutely agree that sometimes it can be downright false, in which case you absolutely need to call them out on it. But again, it comes back to relationships, and it's not necessarily a bad thing to reach out and to potentially say, I didn't really appreciate the headline was sensational or whatever. You can't necessarily change it after the fact, and if it was factual, there's not much you can do. However, reaching out to that person and starting, use the good, bad, good sandwich. So saying, thank you for the feature, and I'm glad that you captured, my feelings accurately. I was somewhat concerned with the headline. I really mean this, not that. And, thanks again. And please contact me anytime if you do follow up, and sort of do the good, bad, good sandwich. Sometimes that may at least help. So, okay, there's one more question. How do you pitch Mr. Demuse? Help. Sorry. Okay, yeah, so we'll get into pitches in a bit. First, let's just quickly go over. So someone's asking about how to pitch a positive message. And so we're going to get to that. First, I'll go through how the three mediums or these three mediums might be somewhat different. And then that, of course, will sort of dovetail into pitching. So with print, what's interesting about print is you actually have the, usually anyway, when I'm talking for the most part, let's say monthly magazines, not necessarily weeklies, but even with weeklies, they've got features that, take several weeks to put together. You have the benefit of time in print, meaning that you can have long conversations, you can cover a lot of background, and in fact, for me, one of my biggest challenges in moving from print to writing for the web and online was not asking those big, long leading questions and getting right to the point and doing something more that's like radio or even video reporting where you need very concise answers. So the lovely thing about print is that there's usually the luxury of time and perhaps even space, meaning that it's a really great medium for maybe more complicated discussions or technical pieces, those sorts of things that, there's a narrative and you can build that. And so when you're being interviewed for print, there's certainly, block off a good amount of time. This is where building that rapport and building background information and, talking about some things that are related, but maybe not exactly what the interview's on, you can actually start to build a really in-depth piece. So you'll also, though, have to do things really well in advance. So you may have reporters or journalists who are going to call you and it's not going to be out for months and months and months. And that's, part of the thing. Now for radio and for video, there's several different things. For radio or for audio, so we don't do radio per se, and that we don't have a station, and you're not going to tune it in your car, but we do audio and podcasts that are a longer format that you can download, listen to later. Podcasts are sort of more like print in that there's sort of a bigger discussion and you've got time. Radio, however, is looking for a soundbite, and even video in some ways, depending on the newscast, are looking for just a soundbite. They want one comment on one part of the story. They're going to ask you several things, but they're going to try and tease out that one little soundbite. Video is somewhat more like that, like if we're talking about a newscast, but radio really, they need very short little clips. And so this is where practice and having even bullet points or speaking points handy, asking for some prep time is absolutely okay. And okay, so someone asked, is it okay to ask for interview questions in advance? It's okay to ask. It's not always going to happen. And I'll tell you why in a couple of reasons, for a couple of reasons. Not because the interviewer wants to spring anything on you or, wants you to over prepare. At the same time, because they're trying to develop a story and a narrative, if you provide all your questions in advance, it can actually stop sort of the process from really being a free and back and forth. It also means I will send sometimes an outline, a theme, a couple points I want to make sure I cover, but I really hesitate to actually hand over set questions, maybe because I don't even have them. And the reason for that is that a lot of these discussions, I don't want to have preconceived ideas of what I need to know. So if I've pre-crafted all my questions, that doesn't really leave a lot of room, that in my mind, if I'm developing a story, I want to ask certain bullet points or themes, but where those answers go is then where the story goes. So it's okay to ask. Many people will give you at least maybe an idea or bullet points, but realistically, it's sort of one of those things. Feel free to ask questions, what it's about, what you might be covering, those sorts of things. It's a courtesy to get interview questions ahead of time. It doesn't mean that you can't ask for time to prepare. You absolutely can. It doesn't mean that you don't have your own notes, but especially on something like radio or video, where you have to be the best. Audio or video interviews are going to be ones where you're comfortable, and if you're really overly scripted, you're spending too much time trying to answer exactly how you want to, as opposed to necessarily what you really know and what you're trying to convey. So while it's good to prepare and feel prepared, having exactly in your mind what you already, I was like, oh, I have to read exactly my answer to this exact question, it can actually really not go well. So it's certainly okay to ask. You may get questions, but recognize that if they don't have all their questions set in stone, that there's room to actually guide the narrative. So that's actually a good thing, I think. Video is one of those things that, just like I'm doing now, and having to stare at myself, which is, gotta tell you guys, you should do this. It's a lot of fun. Video is one of those things where we get really self-conscious. So a microphone in our face can be a little weird. Most people are pretty comfortable, or most comfortable maybe with a print interview, because they're rarely in person. They're usually over the phone. There is a lot of discussion. You build rapport, that sort of stuff. Radio is, they're only going to use 5 seconds, and it's usually a very straightforward question. Video, though, you worry about what your hair looks like, and if you have something in your teeth, and do you have muffin top? Yes, I do. Anyway, so these are all things that our brain is sort of trying to process while we're actually still on camera and supposed to be speaking intelligently. So what I will say for those in video, or if, say, a news crew wants to come to your farm, those sorts of things, what's really important to remember is that when it comes to video, they don't necessarily want just a talking head anyway. So if you've got something that's really important or that you're pitching, so this maybe comes to the question about best management practices and a positive message. If you've got really strong visuals, examples, a day that some really great stuff is happening, or training, or video needs something to look at beyond just the interviewee. So if you're pitching to a video medium, or say like a CTV, a CBC, global, whatever the case may be, if it's a positive story and you think it would work in a video medium, you need strong visuals. You really do. You also need someone who's going to be on camera that is okay being on camera. There's nothing, we all can tell when somebody doesn't want to be on camera. It's uncomfortable for them, it's uncomfortable for us, and it's not terribly effective. Now, that being said, practice, you might, I've had to get used to it, and it's not so bad, but it takes practice, and it takes a certain amount of relaxing with it, getting used to it, being okay with it. So yeah, I would say actually, and it sounds maybe silly, but actually practicing at home with your own camera or with a friend or somebody else on your board, or maybe a grower group you're involved with, or your office or whatever the case may be wants to do some media training and just try it out. They'll probably teach you not to talk with your hands so much, but you'll notice that I don't listen to my own rules. Anyway, so we are going to get into pitching. And speaking of Andrew Campbell, this is one of his stories that has been probably top of our most read stories for the past year. So in pitching stories, whether it's print, whether it's television, whether it's audio, web only, no, you don't need to do their job for them, in that when I say find a hook, that's what they're looking for too. And unfortunately, their hook might not necessarily be the hook that you would love them to pick up on, but they may have their own reasons for doing that, and it may be that the narrative that they can build is just going to be stronger because something that you said really resonated with them, or an example that they saw really worked for them, and that might not be exactly your hook. At the same time, and I will say this from my perspective, from many others, everybody's looking for a great story. And I know there's the saying, if it bleeds, it leads, meaning that, and let's face it, news can be overwhelmingly negative. It can be sensational. It can be, really, we can get a little frustrated by, unless it's a negative story, it doesn't seem to get press time. So I get that. It doesn't mean, I don't think, that we should give up on trying to get good news stories, or at least trying to get in the balanced side to what is being maybe portrayed as a negative or contentious issue. But part of that is recognizing what they need. So like I said with video, video needs strong visuals, and there needs to be something going on. There needs to be something to see. If you've, spend a bit of time figuring out why this matters for what you do on your farm, for your organization, for the industry, what might that hook be? What are you doing differently? Now, really coming at it from the positive light sort of builds into this relationship building, because I will talk about in a little bit later, we'll talk about sort of conflict and what do you do when, the documentary, if we want to call it that, has already come out, and what do you do when you're in damage control, or what do you do when somebody's got it wrong? And part of this is, instead of coming at it from a sense of, look, you just don't understand, or and being, quite confrontational, there's a time to instead offer the alternative. And it doesn't mean that you're doing their work for them, but so to put it in context though, let's say you're talking to a reporter. That reporter likely doesn't make the call on what they cover or not. They probably have to turn around and pitch that story to their editor and their boss. And if they can't sell it you've got to go through them. So the easier you can make it for them to sell it to their boss, the more likely they're going to cover it, and potentially cover it from the aspect that you really want covered, that you really feel is valuable and useful and needs to be out there. So also with radio of course needs sound bites, and they'll do on location and all that sorts of things, but they'll also do it over the phone, but they need somebody who's available and can speak concisely. Print, of course, has a bit of lead time, but I will also say this about lead time, and Stephanie, I see your question, so hang on. Okay, ad hoc phone call, good. Okay, this is what we're going into. Oh goodness, Stephanie, you're so smart. Okay, so recognizing their needs and giving lead time sort of goes into this. So I will say, if you want your press release picked up, and we can talk about press releases in a minute, if you want your press release picked up beyond just the news that's in it, if it's a topic or something that really needs discussion, or maybe would really do well with an on location or whatever, you need lead time. Even for us who do things, we try and be really quick, and with video in the growing season, we want to be on the ball. We still have to plan that. So the more lead time, the better. There's nothing worse than getting a press release on a Friday afternoon. Okay, I should just end there, Friday afternoon. But on a Friday afternoon or a Monday morning for something that's happening Wednesday. We, like everybody else, are doing a job. There's a lot of things going on. You need at least some sort of lead time. So press releases are good to, or, reminders of events that are coming up, an announcement of some kind, that sort of stuff. Now, I will say the days of a press release being, the way news breaks are the only, you got to get creative with them because we get so many, and they should be sort of a beginning of a conversation. Now, granted, all the news outlets, ours included, if it's really just a news item, we're going to take probably a chunk of what you've written, edit it somewhat, because let's face it, there's a marketing angle in it. We're going to try and strip that out and just leave it to the who, what, when, where, why, how. We may or may not use a quote. I will say the quotes that are usually, well, some are really great. The quote builds and is useful. I wouldn't say that you need a quote just to have a quote, because everybody knows that your organization thinks it's great. I'm probably not going to put that in because of course you think it's great. But maybe the quotes that are in there being framing the hook a little bit more, I think would actually probably clue in a journalist to say, okay, so why is this announcement important? Not this is great for our grower group, industry, the two companies that are merging. Why is this great? And build your hook a little bit in there, because a journalist who maybe has no idea the significance of what's being announced, they're just going to report that it happened. They're not really going to go anywhere with it. I would say, now this is my generation speaking, phone calls are great, but phone calls are, and Sean will kill me for this, and I'm on camera, so I'll say it anyway. Different people like different media. I love talking on the phone, but I like talking on the phone at certain times, meaning when I know you're going to call me. And the reason for that is that phone calls are actually quite, hey, guess what? I'm really important. I'm calling you regardless of what you're doing, and it's now your turn to listen to me. They're a little self-centered. And why Sean will hate me if he ever watches this is that Sean calls me all the time. So anyway, we laugh about that. So phone calls, I think, are great if you've done an email first to set up a time, even just a window to chat. Phone calls, especially if you've built a rapport or or know the person or whatever, phone calls are probably better than a press release. Sending a press release and following up that you sent the press release, no. If you sent the press release and you didn't get a phone call back, follow up with an email, but don't just double check that I got it, because I probably did. And if it didn't strike me to follow up with it, then it didn't. And so another email, maybe to set up a time to chat, would be great. Media kits are useful, yes, especially for big events where you might need a map, or you might need there might be a media pass in there, those sorts of things. Print copies of press releases in media kits, those sorts of things, not really that useful. Thumb drives, jump drives with the information on them are probably more useful. I still get CDs. I gotta tell you, I don't even have a computer with a CD-ROM in it anymore. So save some money, save some time, don't bother sending those. But jump drives and useful things you physically need are fine in a media kit. But yeah, I don't know if the cost and the effort that goes into building media kits, it has to be for specific events, conferences, those sorts of things. Just background info or promo, I don't think they're as useful. So, using with, well, okay. So the question is using read and received emails appropriate? Sure, go ahead. Realistically, okay, this is where, and all of us have biases, which we're also going to talk about. Here's my bias that yes, you can send read and received and the whole bit. I'll be honest with you, press releases, whether they come through a fax machine, which, oh my gosh, please throw them out. I have actually a vendetta against them, but whatever. Whether they come through a fax or through an email are still not, I mean, they're a tried and true way of getting a message out. Your print pubs are going to pick them up. We're going to grab a portion of it. It does keep people in the loop. They're not a great pitch. I guess that's the difference. If you want to make an announcement, if you are getting the word out about something, they're a communication tool. They're not a pitching tool. If you want to pitch, honestly, that's where I think you send an email saying you want to pitch, and I'm not talking about, I mean, obviously it's going to be somewhat standardized, but ask to set up a phone interview or explain why this is important. But your form email following up from a press release, press releases aren't a pitch. Press releases to me are a communication tool, a news tool. They're not really pitching a story. And that is probably evolving a little bit. That's not how it was when I started in media 12 years ago. That news releases they come across the fax machine, those were leads. And that was how you built news. We don't work that way anymore. We use Facebook, Twitter, conferences, all these sorts of things and news feeds so they're a communication tool, but I don't know if you're depending on press releases for your pitches, you need to do more work than that, I think. Now, I will also say though, just following up and following up and following up with just an email and never getting a response saying, did you read it? Did you read it? Did you read it? That's also not going to work. If you really want to make sure that somebody has read it, and honestly, I'd say, hey, I sent this to you. Here's why it's important. Could we set up a time to chat? Because then you're asking me for an action. And then I'm probably going to email you back and say, yes, let's set up a time. Or thanks, I've covered it in the news section. Or not at this time. Because I do. I probably get, I'm going to say 3 press releases a day that really have no bearing on what I cover. So imagine then that I still get several more that are very important to what I cover. So all editors and journalists are having to edit like that, right? They're having to pick and choose. So I don't think it's rude to check. And I mean, all companies need, if there's, whether you're a media company or agency, those sorts of things, you need some sort of measure of how much reach you had and all those sorts of things. I get that. And so it's not necessarily rude to ask for some sort of confirmation that this went out. But I think if you're depending just on a press release to be a pitch, I think they've moved past that. I think you have to elevate the communication past that, because a press release isn't really seen that way anymore. Okay, so on to, and I hope this is of interest, and again, questions are always welcome, and thank you. These have been fantastic. And we're still okay for time because we started a bit late, but, I don't know what happened there, but that's okay. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, this is in the context of pitching stories or being an interviewee and being a part of some of these stories. And one of the things that I have to talk about is our own biases towards media. And it's not something, there are certain jobs that it's okay to hate or hold in contempt or whatever the case may be. And we say this with a smile because we don't really mean it, but lawyers and used car salesmen, and sometimes media falls in there too. We can, and then not just urban media, but even ag media, we kind of can roll our eyes and say, oh, they're so this and they're so biased to this and they always misquote me. And especially if you've had a bad experience with media, you can bring that bias forward. And if a journalist does call you, and we can tell right away if you have a lot of contempt for the role that we're playing. We can totally tell. And it really will color the exchange, and that's not a positive thing. So I recognize that some people have had poor experiences, and I would encourage those that have, or if you've never even been involved in media, if you've never been interviewed, those sorts of things, and you want to get more involved, but you sort of feel like, oh, they have no clue. I'm hoping that some of what we've talked about today about building resources, building rapport, doing background info, all those sorts of things helps to maybe overcome some of that. So hang on, I've got one more question here. Okay. So how do you feel about press releases from companies like aggregators, basically, is what you're saying? You know what, honestly, I don't think I really judge the value of a press release based on whether or not it came from an aggregator kind of company, agency, or the company itself. Press releases are press releases, and it's really about what's in them. And I mean that not necessarily on how well they're written, although that plays a role, but really it's the content. Content drives everything. So how newsworthy, how exciting, what context is there. So, providing that a bit of that hook, and really how much it applies to my audience. And that's going to be for just about, now that's me, and that's how we run our ship. But I think if you were to talk to, mainstream media, that sort of stuff, it's always going to be about, okay, is this pertinent for my readers and my followers and listeners? So no, it doesn't really matter to me where they come from. And in fact, I will say there are some agencies that I probably have a closer relationship with, like personally, I know these people very well. And so we can chat back and forth and, oh yeah. And so I recognize their name or the company name in my email maybe faster than if it came straight from the company. So does that mean that they'll get onto the site more than somebody else? Not necessarily. It still comes down to content. But realistically, it's about that relationship you have with. So yeah, I wouldn't say that there's, personally anyway, that there's any bias towards, say, like an aggregate sending me something. So if we're talking about, hang on, I need water. I've been talking for a long time. You'll note it's not coffee because I didn't have time to make coffee because we had a whole ton of technical difficulties. And so anyway, next time. Okay, so we've talked about sort of our own biases, and this is where, and I'm, if anyone follows along at realagriculture.com, I have written several times, or I talk a lot about the importance of being involved in your grower groups and from the farming side, in your industry organizations, these sorts of things. And there's a reason, long, but much more than I think it's really important to have various voices heard and making sure that we've got new members coming onto boards and moving ideas ahead and all those sorts of things. Part of it is also that there are actually incredible development, personal and professional development opportunities that come through being involved in some of these organizations, including public speaking or media training or any of these things. So one of the things that I really encourage people to become involved if they can. There's also on the personal side. So if it's something you really want to do, and I mean, I went to 4-H and I did Stockman's Club in university. There's certainly from the perspective of your own personal and professional development through high school, through university, and then into your career, whether that's a farming career or an industry career, there's always opportunities and to learn some of these skills. And even like attending today, I hope this is sort of like a get the ball rolling webinar as opposed to this is where it ends. But sometimes accessing some of those training sessions and those is easier if you're part of a group or if you're seeking out some of these training opportunities. So I certainly encourage everybody to do some of those things. If this is something that interests you and you want to do more of, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And it takes away a bit of the unknown. It takes away a bit of the fear. It gets you a little more comfortable. It also builds your network. It builds the people that you know, and you can practice these skills and those sorts of things. So whether that's, from getting involved in media from the interviewee side, or if you're with a board and, they're saying, we need somebody to be a spokesperson, you can put up your hand and say, yes, I will go do this. And you can sort of meld what you're passionate about and what means something to you with communicating and getting the message out and those sorts of things. So I highly recommend that these are things that you tackle and take advantage of. So now I just want to make sure I know that there were yes. Okay. So now we're going to move on. Oh, look, I look very scary when I have my laptop open. Okay, so this is a big one, and there's probably going to be questions that kind of come up, but I think we're doing okay for time. Yeah, I hope. Okay, so this is where we get to some of where even as Sarah alluded to earlier, with fact-checking off the record. Okay, so is there such thing as off the record? You always hear this, okay, so I'll tell you, but this is off the record. Or, I've been in meetings, and my coworker Calvin's been in meetings, and it's like, well, and the speaker at the front will say, I'll explain this if she puts her pen down or turns off the recorder. The fact of the matter is, if you agree to an interview, you are on the record. At the same time, any journalist, any interviewee worth their salt should be using their judgment. And realistically, unless it serves the story and the narrative, there are certain things that are discussed that really are background info and don't have to be in an article. Just as if you want to be a great resource and you want to be a great interview, we as journalists, we also need sources that trust us. We need people that we can call off the record to flesh out an idea, to say, what's actually going on in this organization, or why am I hearing rumblings about that? We need to be able to go to someone and be very frank about what we have questions about or what's really going on. And the person we're asking needs to trust us enough to know that what they tell us is not on the record and is not going to go into print. At the same time, if you've agreed to an interview, you can't necessarily pick and choose what the journalist prints. So this is where communication and trust and really a discussion has to happen on what is the interview portion, what is the question portion of what's being discussed, and what isn't. And you, as someone who's being interviewed, has to know, are you dealing with a one-off reporter that just wants a quote? Are you dealing with someone who's developing a story and who you're probably going to deal with 7, 10 years down the line? Honestly, because that's how it works, right? So, while it's important to know that if you're in an interview, everything is on the record, there is a balance to that. There is judgment that has to happen, because there are discussions that happen that you have to know that just because you're talking to me or another journalist, not everything you say is being recorded or being written down or any of those things. So it's a bit of a balancing act is really, I guess what I'm saying, is that there is no cut and dried, never say anything out of line because everything's going to make it into print. It really does matter on the context. Now, when it comes to when we're talking about avoiding landmines, or this comes back to being able to say no and being able to ask for prep time, or in the middle of an interview, if you feel you've been asked a question that's beyond your scope to answer, it is absolutely okay to say that it is. The most helpful thing you could do, though, is then refer them to the person who should answer that question. So some people they don't want to do the interview because they don't feel, oh, I'm not the right person to speak to all of it. That's okay. You can communicate to the interviewee ahead of time what it is you are willing to talk about, and you can frame that absolutely in the sense of what you're comfortable talking about. As a journalist, and as someone who's doing the interviewing, I often appreciate that, another chunk of the story may be better served by interviewing somebody else. It's more work for me, but it probably makes a better piece, and I'm absolutely okay with doing that. Now we get into fact checking, and this is one of the parts that, depending on if you're on the journalism side or if you're on the interview side or in the company side, companies too would really love to know, are there, can they see what's being written or put together before it goes out? And the short answer is, anytime you see either a portion or a written part or even a rough cut of a video, it's a courtesy, and it usually has to be discussed ahead of time. And there's a really great reason for that, and one of it is editorial integrity. So most journalists, I shouldn't say that. Now I consider myself sort of an Aggie who happens to be in media. there are those who, in journalism, who over their dead body would they ever let anybody see anything they've written before they've handed it to their editor. And that's completely within their right and their realm of what they do. At the same time, there's nothing wrong with offering to fact check as long as it's framed as fact checking, meaning that you're there to look at facts. And if you don't like the tone or if you don't like an angle they've taken, you can ask them to change it. You can't expect them to. And you also can't preemptively say, you can't print that. I'm going to go ballistic. I'm threatening this, but because you agreed to the interview. So again, this becomes a balance. Now, I will say in agriculture, we tackle some very technical pieces, whether it's equipment related, genomics, plant breeding and agronomy, life cycles, all these sorts of things of insects and diseases. We can get into some very technical stuff that if you don't have an agriculture background, or, I mean, for me, I have an ag background, but machinery is a mystery wrapped in an enigma, wrapped in a riddle. I know the differences between them, but you start talking engines and I just tune out. So for me, when I'm going to do those, I actually really appreciate somebody who says, I'll ask, can I send you the part on the specs and can you tell me if I've got it right or wrong? Or those, so offering to do a fact check, especially on a technical piece, can be really appreciated depending on where things are coming from. Now, all of that said, it's about fact checking. So there actually used to be people, when things were really just print, their whole jobs were fact checkers, and they would double check people's names and the spelling of their names. They would double check the spelling of the town. They will double check the day of the week, and it was this incredible process. And I'm a little sad sometimes that we miss that, because frankly, a messy piece that someone's name is spelt wrong or the town is spelt wrong or whatever, it does take away from the piece. But realistically, making sure that the bullet points are there would be a courtesy. And as much as many people would love to see something before it goes to print, this is where the relationships come in. And this is where, so let's say you have a really strong relationship with someone at CTV or someone at the Globe and Mail or somebody at, they're still probably not going to let you see their stuff. But if you've got a relationship with them, if there are any questions that come up, or if you do have concerns after the fact, and you have that rapport and you can go back and forth, it starts to become, you start to have a bit, first of all, the reporter knows that you're a trusted source and a resource, and they're probably going to want to come back to you, and they don't want to burn that bridge. At the same time, we need press and we need media to be able to talk about and discuss some uncomfortable things, and two sides of a story, maybe three sides of a story. We have to be able to do that from the perspective of talking to one person alone, talking to another person alone, talking to another company alone, and bringing in a narrative of what a situation is from all the angles. It's not perfect. It's an art as much as it's anything else. It's a craft, really. So while I recognize that, and I, for one, I'm actually one that if ever I've done interviews with people, for the most part, I often do send chunks of what I've done, maybe the chunk that they're included in or whatever. I usually have some sort of preamble that sets out the parameters of what I'm asking for. I'm asking for fact checking, if I've missed any glaring points. And this is actually one thing that now's a good time to sort of put in there. If the person who's interviewing you is interviewing you for a web piece, web pieces are typically much shorter than a print piece. And they might have to get really ruthless with their editing, and they might end up cutting out some really important points. So this is where, a fact check or those sorts of things might really come in handy, that if you do get to see a technical piece, you can, really drive home what was really important. This is where, of course, doing a bit of prep time, recognizing, like if it's from a personal perspective, it's probably less of an issue. But if you're speaking on behalf of an organization or a company or to a specific cause, a bit of prep and having messaging and bullet points ahead of time, and I'm not talking about super like stick in the mud, you must stay on message, but a bit of prep time to make sure that you keep the conversation focused on what you really want talked about can sort of avoid some of those fact-checking disasters that can happen after the fact. So I think yeah. Now I will say, even making the offer to say that you're available after an interview to double check or bounce stuff off of. So even if they're not going to send you what they've written, which we've established is okay, they may, pick up the phone and just say, is this accurate? Is this right? I wrote this, is that, and then away you go. And so you can do it that way. Okay. So now we're working into sort of, a bit of the meat of this, and where I actually, one of what really leads into our discussion part. So what you're looking at on the screen is a screen capture from one of the McDonald's YouTube videos. So now, if I'm hoping most of you have seen some of the webinars before, but maybe we can go over it a little bit now on some of the really great ways that social media has been used in the food and farming arena to sort of bust some myths and get some good news out there and some really great and strong and factual information, all of those sorts of things. So the McDonald's campaign on YouTube is a shining example of that. Although I just read yesterday someone's take in the National Post that the column is not listed as opinion, and I really wish it was, because they basically have taken one of the episodes that features Grant Imahara, I think that's his name. He was on Mythbusters, and they're talking about how the McRib is made, and the author is basically saying that I don't think this is really helping any because it's still disgusting. Anyway, it's not marked as opinion, and I kind of wish it was, because that's an opinion. But anyway, so when we're talking about mainstream media for the most part, but farm media too, but mainstream media, when we're talking about stories that are dealing with perhaps sensational issues or very meaningful issues, things with a lot of emotion behind them, and oh, hang on, I might have missed a question. Sorry. Oh. That might be... Nope, that's not what I meant to do. Uh-oh, hang on. Sorry, I'm trying to get this question and it's not doing. Okay, someone, of course, is telling me not to talk with my hands. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll really try to not to. Anyway, but I do that a lot. So we're on to, yeah. Okay, we're good. So we're on to sort of, not crisis management. I'm not a crisis management person. I work in media, but a few tips for dealing with maybe some pretty emotional issues and some after the fact issues, maybe where you feel that the story has been biased or one-sided. And I think often, and I'm not talking about the undercover drama stuff and those sorts of things, but in a story that is a meaningful story and those sorts of things, that they can come off as one-sided. One of the helpful things, of course, is we'd love to avoid this beforehand, and so that's what I've talked about earlier, is being that resource, reaching out ahead of time, pitching stories. All of those things are, in a small way, or maybe not so small way, having your name and what you know about and what you talk about and are passionate about, having that in the back of a journalist's mind. So when a story comes across their desk or their editor hands them an assignment to go and talk about water quality issues in a certain area, or noise pollution from a certain this, or large equipment on the highway, or whatever the issue might be, or frankly gluten or GMOs or whatever the case may be, if you've already sort of worked your relationship with some of these media people, they might reach out to you first before somebody else or another group, and writing the piece without checking in with you, those sorts of things. So that's sort of one of it. So that does, of course, take into being helpful versus confrontational, and this probably leads in more to when someone has probably been very biased, or maybe outright they've just taken one group's view, one organization's view, and set it out unchallenged, and you really take issue with it. Picking up the phone or on Twitter and basically telling them that they're an idiot or lazy or just plain wrong probably isn't going to get you very far, because realistically we're all human, and this might be, the person's first week, or maybe they have a really hard bias. You don't know, but realistically, you're not going to get very far if when you pick up the phone, you tell them that they're an idiot. So, and I mean, maybe that's blunt, but that's the way it is. So being helpful, offering your side or offering availability to discuss another aspect can probably get you further. I say probably because, as a lot of the questions allude to on the bottom about, press releases and pitching stories and those sorts of things, I think there's probably a lot of people here that are maybe the ones that are trying to get their discussions out there, and maybe they're not getting picked up on. So being helpful and sort of offering up a time to discuss is probably going to get you further. So, okay. So we're okay to go 5 minutes over, and we have a couple minutes. I think we're almost at the last slide. So I did want to bring up letters to the editor. Do they still matter? Okay, so, and this is where one of the questions I always get, and so this is where we'll start. If there are any questions, we've got a couple minutes, so please ask them now. Again, sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button. I'm trying to scroll to the bottom here to get questions, that's all. Anyway. So I do. Any questions now would be good. I always get a question about when we talk about advocating, when we talk about reaching out, preaching outside the choir, when you start talking about Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and starting a blog and all these sorts of things, I always get someone saying, I'm really shy, or I'm an introvert, or I'm a poor speller, or, do I have to do this? And realistically, no. Of course not. It's always within, our choice to be involved. But I think probably if you're in this discussion, you do want to be involved. But I think it's really important to choose your level of involvement. If you love photography, join Instagram, or maybe start a blog. If you're an extrovert and you love to talk and you don't mind being on camera, put up your hand when your board or your community or frankly, a group you're associated with is saying, maybe we should talk to the outside world a bit more, all those sorts of things. You have to choose your level of involvement. If you are a great writer, you write your blog, but then I encourage whatever form you sort of use, most of them sort of all tie in together. And part of how, and actually the Ag Chat Foundation had a really good post on their blog just this last week about non-ag hashtags to either use or follow. And I thought that was a really great point, because how often do we only use, and I mean I do it too, West Canadian Ag and Aunt Ag and Ag Chat, and it sort of keeps us within our little bubble. That, we all have other interests, whether it's food or nutrition or fitness, or if it's local economies or sustainability or all these sorts of things that these conversations are happening outside of agriculture, and there's other people that have the same interests and really want to talk about it, but they may not have anyone in their midst that has the same background as you. And so I encourage everyone to get out there and maybe explore some different hashtags, or explore another medium of social media that they're not already involved in, or certainly, yes, encourage maybe the groups that you're involved with to get more involved, but that also might mean putting up your hand to have to do it. So I suppose you do have to be careful on what you suggest people should do, because then that often means you end up doing it. So I think, so we've gone 1 minute over, which Heather tells me is okay. I would say the one thing, I'll just put it onto, so that's me. That sprayer is exactly 1.25 Lyndsey's tall. And Stephanie had to leave, I think, but yes, that was also at Canada's Outdoor Farm Show. So this is me on Twitter. That's my email address. And please follow me on Twitter, or even just send me tweets if you have questions. Zip me an email. One of the things I wanted to say is that what I've noticed in probably the last year, and maybe it's just because I'm more interested in it, I don't know, but it seems to me like there has been, and maybe it's also because social media has really been building and gaining acceptance, that we do have significant initiatives on sharing on connecting farm and food. We've got, some great, like Farm and Food Care in Ontario is launching a Saskatchewan chapter, which is really lovely. We've got some really great initiatives with Ag in the Classroom, and all these initiatives that are starting to get, I think, more popular, more traction, and maybe just by virtue of agriculture as an industry has always, I think, recognized how important it is as an industry, but I think we're all increasingly recognizing that there's this need for information for our consumers, for our customers, and we do have existing groups and organizations that are doing a wonderful job and now can really spread the word even faster through social media, and I think we're just going to see more and more and more of that build. So reaching out past agriculture, I think we already have some really wonderful ways and means to do that, but there can always be more, and we should always be doing more, and part of that is going to be also building contact and resources with our media to get more coverage, to become those resources so that they come to us first. So I have one question, the letters to the editor. Okay. Okay, so the question is, okay, the effectiveness of letters to the editor. So, and, okay, I'll just answer. Can I answer that later? Okay, I'll do it in a minute. The question is, what is the effectiveness of letters to the editor? Well, I'll ask you guys too. What do you read them? And of course, now we're talking basically print. So, but the modern version of the letters to the editor-ish, and I say this with a giant asterisk beside it, is the comment section on websites. And sometimes the comment section is incredible. Sometimes it makes you want to throw your laptop out the window, because I read the comments, not so much on our blog. I mean, we get a couple that are really out there, or people you'd call trolls or whatever the case may be. And I think with comments, of course, there's less letters to the editor. Let's put it this way. If you've taken the time to write a letter to a print publication in response to something that's been in there, it may or may not get in the paper or magazine. It may or may not get in a timely manner. It may be edited, and they don't run everything. So on the other hand, then we have comments, which are immediate and usually largely left. Some are removed, but they're not usually entirely moderated. We moderate our comments to a degree, but honestly, for me, unless it's spam, I pretty much post it because I don't want to be censoring anybody, and that's what a lot of sites do. Reading the comments on general media pieces, I think, is probably one of the most frustrating things in the world, and I usually don't, because it just makes me feel like we just have so far to go, and I don't know how we'll ever get there, as far as, creating some constructive dialogue as opposed to, fighting and bickering. Letters to the editor, do I read them? I mean, really? Nah. Unless someone else has, and, now I know for some organizations, they're a way to get an opinion piece by their executive director or their president or something like that, to get that into a publication, to use that media or medium. That's also, though, a judgment call on whether or not they have space. I think probably in this day and age, a more effective way, if we're talking from an organization's perspective, of sending in letters to the editor as a column from their, their representation, I would probably use social media more and use your own streams and build your own community to move some of that messaging through. Doesn't mean I'd abandon the letters to the editor, it just wouldn't be the only stream that I would use. So how effective are they? They are sort of, in print anyway, they're the old school way of creating a dialogue, but they're pretty old school. So yes, they still work, they're still effective, I guess, but for me it's part of the discussion time isn't there. In that it's usually weeks. So, okay, so I'm getting the couple minutes, and someone, who I won't say who, is saying that they never read the comments because they're enraging, which, yes, And yeah, anyway, so I will probably leave it there. Thank you, Heather. I'm getting the you must be done now, but I hope everyone has found this at least somewhat useful. I do appreciate the time that you've committed to the day. This will be archived, so that's good. So if it was of interest and you think somebody else should watch it, then it is going to be housed online. So thank you so much for all the great questions and for being so attentive. Please do zip me an email or send me a tweet. Don't call me because I don't like that. Anyway, so thank you so much.